So from an introductions and startup and everything else, we have a couple of really interesting updates to share with you, and let me start with that. I'm just going to quickly see if Kim is on. Kim is not. Oh, there's Kim. Kim, good timing. Yay! I think everybody else figured out I was literally dragging out the words to get you comment, but here you are. The timing is perfect. So I'm going to hand it over to Kim because we have had an exciting kind of kickoff to the first student chapter of FinTech Women. And so, Kim, why don't you tell us more about it? I know a couple of folks from the group are also here.
Yeah, great. And thank you, Jagati. And again, my apologies for being late. But in any event, this is truly so exciting. And Jagati, I'm thinking that you probably teed up the event on the 6th with Suffolk. Great.
I have not, but then you go ahead and then I will.
Okay, so stay tuned. Jagati's going to talk about that. But during that session, there's going to be an announcement about the launch of the first student chapter of FinTech Women at Suffolk University that actually launched this month. And it's incredibly exciting news as it further demonstrates our terrific partnership with Suffolk, but it also represents an important step forward in the continued growth and evolution of this group and its commitment to the advancement of women in the FinTech field. And it's so apropos that it actually did launch last week within the Women's History Month. So, while this has been an area of focus for us and something that we have been looking to do, the formation of the Suffolk chapter has been completely student-led. And I would especially like to congratulate Laura Velez for all of her efforts in making this come to fruition. And I see, Laura, if you just want to wave so everybody can see. I know that you're on every single month with us and you've been such a fabulous member. And this is just really, really terrific news. And I will say personally, it's been a real privilege getting to know Laura and to work with her over the past couple of months. And I've been just so amazed and impressed with her vision, her commitment, the organization to make this happen. And knowing that I speak for my colleagues of the FinTech Women Board, we are all very much looking forward to supporting the development of this group in partnership with Ken Mooney, who has agreed to be the academic advisor. So, truly, this is the future of FinTech. And if, what Laura has done is any reflection of what lies ahead, for women in this field, then I'm confident for a lot of future success. And you're going to hear more about this from Laura and the board in the next month's event. But in the meantime, just please join me in congratulating Laura and the women at Suffolk for this fabulous accomplishment. So yay, very, very excited to work with you. If I can just, Jagati, take one quick second. I know we've got lots of campus partners who are on the call. And one of the things that Laura and I have been talking about is that, we look at this as a prototype and a fabulous prototype and hoping that this is something that we might, look to kind of involve other universities in the area. So thank you, Laura.
And I'm going to leap off our springboard from where Kim just stopped because I think there are 2 points I'll add. One is talking with SRK a few minutes ago, this is where we think as young women and men, organization is not, or in fact, our events, as you folks know, not limited just for women. We're just focusing on gender diversity in everything we do. I think if we consider the fabulous networks they create while they're in school and as it stays with them as they grow in their careers, it's a phenomenal thing to have and a strength to have as they go in their careers. So Laura, thanks for getting us here. I see Leah in there too, and look forward to doing a lot more with all of you. And in the same spirit, the organization is being formally announced throughout the Suffolk community as well as that network on April 6th. And April 6th, we are co-hosting, FinTech Women and Suffolk University is co-hosting a panel on something that's equally important in terms of conversations, how to close the funding gap and then raise capital for women. You'll see a lot of familiar names in there, friends of FinTech Women, as well as others in the community speaking. You'll hear Senator Mendoza, Rolona, as well as Gretchen Wilson, who are all going to be on that. So hope many of you will join. You'll get some information from us on that, and hope to see many, if not all of you at that event as well. There's Ken dropping in a pitch for that right now. So going then quickly to our session, because it's been a long preamble getting us there. When we started talking about security in a financial services or fintech context, our thought was really, let's talk about cybersecurity. It's cool, it's hip, it's sexy. You talk about threats, you talk about I know there are some more sound bites that our experts will refer to, but it really sounded like cybersecurity is where everybody's mind is. We should be talking about that. As we dove deeper into it, what we realized is, and as it should be, that there's a lot more happening in terms of security around in financial services and the younger fintechs, both institutional and the younger in the younger and early stage fintechs. So we expanded the conversation to really talk about and wanted to talk about information security. And our two guests today reflect both ends of the spectrum. And what's interesting is that as they talk about their careers, you'll see that their career paths have kind of overlaid each other in several points. Both of them have worked in large organizations and institutions. Both of them have worked in smaller or are working in smaller and large. So you'll see a lot of similarities, and you'll also see slight differences. And from folks who are looking at the future of financial services and careers and such, I think there are some very good lessons to be had from that perspective, as well as from the perspective of really understanding information security in its broad context and what it means for both early stage organizations as well as institutions in financial services. So as introduction, and I'm going to have them speak a lot more to their backgrounds in some time. So as a very quick introduction, Diana Riley is the Vice President and the Senior Information Officer with Global Cybersecurity at StateStreet. And Barbara Cousins is the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, at Flywire. So two different perspectives, and welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining. I know I have prepped you, but I still cannot wait to hear what you have to share. So here's where I want to start, not by asking you to introduce yourselves, but really to have you tell us, what does information security mean? And where does the whole sexy aspect of that, cybersecurity, come into play? Either one of you, I'll throw it open.
I'll give it a go first. So when you talk about information security and cybersecurity, it's probably good to note that they're both part of the same family, they do kind of tend to do different things. The world of information or cybersecurity is quite large, and you can kind of divvy it up into defensive and offensive protections. So from an information security standpoint, we're talking about the security of information systems and the data of itself, and the controls around how do you protect that data, how do you ensure that there is no disruption, no unauthorized changing of that data. Really and truly, the three tenets or core tenets by which we're supposed to work is, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the data. Those are the three things that are our prime focus. Whereas with cybersecurity, we're talking more, I think that topic spans more technology, more regulations. It can encompass law enforcement, critical infrastructure. There's also some privacy aspects there as well. So there's just so much that it covers that sometimes I can't think of all of it. So I think at this point, I'll kind of switch it over to Barbara and let her give her point of view as well.
Yep. So as Diana mentioned, when you think of information security, most people do think of, the digital sense, but you also have to think of any paper documentation that you may have as well. So it's all information that we're supposed to secure, and we're supposed to ensure that that data has the right protection and security around it, right? So when I think of information security, my security team, we're pretty well organized in that I have a cybersecurity department, I have security engineers, I have application security engineers, I have infrastructure security engineers. We're protecting everything that we could possibly protect for our clients, for our payers. I'm in the fintech area, for our employees as well. So a lot of information security officers are also becoming privacy officers because we have so many regulations around this data and how we have to protect it that we almost become privacy officers because we have to know the ins and outs of the requirements associated with some of these regs. In my organization, I am the privacy officer. I'm also the security officer, and I'm also head of risk management. So I wear multiple hats, but they all kind of intertwine in with each other. When I think of cybersecurity, I think of my penetration testers. I think of secure code reviews. I think of threat intelligence, monitoring, that type of stuff. My team even focuses on the dark web. We're constantly looking and assessing the risks around us from a cyber perspective. But like I mentioned, my team is large, so we do look at information security in all aspects and assets of it.
So thank you both. I caught both of you say this today, and also it came up in our prep sessions that information security is not new. It's been around for a while, but the current flavor of information security has changed and probably will continue to evolve. I want to flip this because you've given us a sense of what information security is, and I want to leap from there to understanding both of you as career one professionals in this space. Because when I think about when I think about 20 years ago when we started thinking about web security in the early 2000s, these roles did not exist. You mentioned wearing multiple hats, Barbara. These roles do not exist. So could you walk us through your career path as well and tell us how you landed here? Did you go to school for this, or can one go to school for this?
No, my degree is actually in social sciences. So this was not the career path I had chosen. I did find at an early age I had a love for technology, but I started at KPMG. When I was very young, I was client facing, and I started off doing assisting in like a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 audit, doing vulnerability scanning. And from there, I had, advanced my career doing a lot of stuff client focused, learning a lot of different industries, because as you guys know, with the Big Four, they go into a company and you provide advisory services. And so you kind of learn the ins and outs of the organization. While I was there, I was asked to move internally to secure our own information and work on a global team. So I was actually based out of Amsterdam for about 10 years. There I learned all the different privacy laws of different countries, because one of the key requirements they asked us to do was to create a global area network. So we were connecting 167 countries to one network, and I was a part of 5 people. And we had to write the security requirements to allow every country to connect. So think about that. It's not an easy task when you sit there and go, what are going to be the security requirements? Back then, we based it on the BS 7799, which is the British standard. Some of you may never even heard of that one, but and that had about 100 to 200 different security controls that you would really assess on. And we came up with this great number of 167, and the partners at KPMG said, great job. Now get it down to 22 and tell us what these requirements are to connect all these countries. And we don't want firewalls between us, guys. We just want them to be able to exchange data globally. So it was quite a challenge, but it was fun. And I did that for a period of time. After that, I went to Fidelity and became the CISO of the private equity side of the house. So they had... Fidelity would buy companies, and they would buy them in all sorts of different industries. So there was a tomato farm in Maine, oil and natural gas company in Denver, I had a restaurant, I had a hotel, I had a car service, I had 2 software development houses, I had a telecommunications office, and I was the CISO for all these different companies, which is why the work that I did at KPMG was really important to Fidelity, because they were like, here's a girl that could go into any industry and figure out how to secure it. And I did that for 8 years. And it was a Fidelity board member that is a board member of Flywire, which is where I am today, that had asked me to do a risk assessment of the company. And lo and behold, they ended up hiring me. So that's how I'm here. I had no intention of leaving Fidelity, but this being in the fintech world sounded interesting. So that's how I ended up getting here.
So I heard from you, before I pass it on to Diana, because your story is equally fascinating. What I heard from you, Barbara, were a couple of interesting points. One is, you probably never expected to be here when you started your career, but you were open to the change. You accepted it as it came to you, and you built on it. And then the other thing I also heard, which is interesting, is networks, not just the digital type, but your human physical world networks helped you along in your career and got you to what I'm going to guess from everything that you do and how busy you stay, a very interesting and fulfilling job right now.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it was networking. And just like when I went from KPMG to Fidelity, I wasn't looking for a job then either. Yeah. Somebody had just reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested? And at KPMG, I was a director. This was going to be my first CISO role. I was like, oh, that's great. So I was building security programs for all these crazy industries, not typical of what I was coming across at KPMG, but equally as challenging and a lot more fun, I will admit.
I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to hold on to that one till I give Diana a chance to tell us about your career path, Diana.
Sure. So very similar to Barbara, my degree is in English literature. So I am a long way from that, but no regrets. My career started off on the technical side as a Unix administrator for Fidelity. And I worked for Fidelity for a number of years, kind of just going up the ranks from junior to senior. And within that role of itself, the area that I supported, I was kind of a one-woman shop in terms of taking care of, I didn't see it at the time, but basically the security of that environment. So while you're more thinking along the lines of technology in terms of making sure that the systems are up so that your users can do their development work and what have you, at the same time, you're also responsible for ensuring that there's no unauthorized access to that environment. Having done that for a number of years, I decided to go back to school when the role of information security became kind of distinct from the actual technical things that we were doing. So in my world of Unix, you're hands-on on the keyboard, working on servers, working on workstations, building them, configuring them, what have you. And part of that is the security, but then in a way it started to kind of get separated out. And at that particular time around, I think this was about 2004 or 5, Fidelity decided to start moving a lot of things offshore. And in a way I thought about it, I'm like, well, the more you move things offshore, you're going to require controls to ensure that the system is still secure and that you're not opening up firewall rules that allow additional people into the environment. So in thinking about that, I'm like, okay, security is going to become a much bigger and more prominent path going forward. And so said, so kind of done. I went back and got my master's in just basically information security of the environment. It was called informatics at the time. And it really just showed you what are all the different controls that are necessary within the different parts of technology. So we're talking about the various types of domains from from networking to telecommunications, cryptography, disaster recovery, the whole gambit, all the things that you were still doing on a technology side, but now you're looking at it from a slightly different perspective. What I have found in my career path is that having had that technology background allowed me to soak up that knowledge that much more quickly. You are more than welcome. You know, you can easily just read a book and come in off the street and get into the security world. But I also think that having a foundation of understanding how the systems work, how do they interact with other parts of the infrastructure, go a long way hand in hand with the controls that come from the security. It allows you to understand from the IT perspective, kind of also from an audit perspective, what are expectations. So when we write a book or you read a book about security, it says you must do X, Y, Z in order to secure this environment. But it doesn't take into account what is your environment? What does your business do? So while it's a blanket statement, it does not cover all environments. So now it's up to you to understand, how do I make this control work within these different areas? And in some cases it can work, and in other cases it can't. But having that kind of technology background gives you the understanding of maybe why it can't, and then how you can kind of compensate for any lack of controls that are in place. So I think it helps very much. It also gives you a way to understand when someone's kind of BSing you as well. You know, sometimes your IT people might say, oh, we can't do this because it's going to break X, Y, Z. And you're like, nah, kind of been there. I know that it's not going to be perfect, but it's not going to do all of the disastrous things that you're whining about. But then on the flip side of that, it also helps you to understand where they're coming from. And maybe when they say that they can't do that, you're like, yep, yeah, I can definitely see why they can. And now it's your kind of job to explain maybe to an auditor, if you're there kind of representing them, why it can't actually be done. And your auditor is more apt to take that recommendation from your security person than necessarily from the IT person. Just because they know that you're kind of outside of it, and hopefully that you're giving the best information for the business. So long and short, started out basically in IT, and then just kind of found a path that led to information security, and kind of along the way picked up privacy as well, to Barbara's point. Without some of the knowledge of the privacy regulations, you can't secure your environment completely. So you need to know what those regulations are, so that then you can come up with the appropriate controls to put in place to satisfy both whatever information security regulations you might have, and also the privacy regulations as well. And then as you kind of go along the path, you just pick up more and more. You pick up the risk management piece of things. Whereas before, within your technical world, you're just doing things because these are the right things to do. You know that they're there to protect the environment, but you don't necessarily think of them as controls. Once you get into risk management, you find out what are these things. They're called one thing in a particular sec, but called something else in a different area. And being able to understand that the two of them are really just the same thing, but just using different language, and then being able to explain that language to somebody outside of your sphere. That's also that is huge. I love IT, but sometimes they tend to go on and on with acronyms, and anybody outside of that world is just like, you're talking a second language, and what does that mean? So being able to translate that down to plain English, and then they're just like, that's what he said. So just kind of picking up all of that along the way. I will say, to be fair, that I no longer, those technical skills, they sort of diminish as time goes by, as you learn the different aspects, and you go deeper into the information side of things, then you're more hands off of the technical. But it's still that foundation. I still think is very important.
It's funny you ended there, because that was my follow-up question to you, Barbara, that I held off on. This is a question that comes up from our audience often. How technical do you need to be? And Diana just said that as her career progressed, she understands that the foundation in technology was useful. But Barbara, what do you see? Your role has evolved as well.
Right, my role has evolved. What I would say is always know that the right questions to ask. It is very interesting. Like, you have that technical foundation. You don't essentially lose it. It's just not as great as you used to be, and you're probably not as fast. So when I think back to the days when I used to be a hacker, it was a fun job. I loved doing it. But if you ask me to hack something now, it's going to take me a lot longer. I can probably get there, but it's going to take me a ways. Definitely not going to be as fast as my penetration team is today. But to the point that I'm making to answer your question, when I look at the attack vectors associated with my penetration testing team, and I look at what their attack vectors are and their test plan and things like that, it may not be as technical, but I can still find their gaps. And I can still say, why wouldn't you go down this path? Or why aren't we looking at this way? And so it's knowing those right questions to ask. You may not, again, like I said, be as technical as your team, but you're still learning every day. It's really knowing what questions to ask and making sure they're the right questions. My team is still flabbergasted by that. I went from knowing C++ and Java to knowing Ruby on Rails. And I'm not great with Ruby on Rails, but right now I can have those conversations with my team and talk about gems and things like that. And they always do a step back, like, where did you gain this knowledge? And it's really paying attention to what they're saying. I listen very well to my team and what they're talking about. And I'm not ashamed to go off and look something up if I'm like, wait a minute, I have no idea what they're talking about over here. Because that's going to happen to you.
So that's, what I'm hearing is it's continuous learning. This is definitely a specialized field. I'm sure today we can go to school and possibly learn cybersecurity or information security as curriculum. When both of you started your career, it wasn't. And what both of you did along the way was really continuous learning. And I had to tell you, as I hear you talk and the terms like attack vectors, it's like hearing something that I would read in a fictional book when I have the chance to read these days. But I'm understanding that I'm also from what both of you are speaking, I'm also understanding that these are real things happening in today's world. So I was actually going to try something in getting a little bit interactive with our audience, but given the time and really the knowledge and information that both of you have to share, I'm going to skip that. So just from an audience, from sharing with the audience perspective, we were planning to use Zoom's whiteboard capability to maybe ask a few questions, have everybody type in your responses and see where we land. We're still going to hold on to that idea, but maybe not today because I have so many more questions to ask our audience. Ask our guests. I want to go from where we just spoke. So we went from kind of understanding what information security is, spoke about your careers, kind of a personal view on what is required to be successful in this career. I want to look a little bit at the industry right now. And both of you are looking at two ends of, or two bookends, so to speak, right, of the industry, institutional and a fintech, a successful fintech, not an early stage anymore, Barbara, very successful international fintech. And my question is, can you share with us what does the industry see as top threats? What does that mean? And I know you cannot share specific examples because you'll have to shoot all of us after that. But anecdotally, perhaps, from the industry, what are threats? And could you share with us how does the industry, industry kind of acknowledge and work towards them or appreciate them?
Is that for me or you want Diana to come?
You know what? Why don't you start and then we'll hand it to Diana. Yeah, okay. It doesn't matter. Either one of you, both of you.
So as you can imagine in the fintech space, I'm completely in the cloud, everything. So it goes against everything I have spent the majority of my career doing, which is KPMG and Fidelity, completely everything's in a data center that they own, they manage. Now you go and rock your world and put everything in the cloud, and now you've got to learn it, right? So my risks are slightly different. Like, I worry about cloudjacking, which is, embedding code into third-party libraries because they're using a bunch of that stuff. I worry about the vendors, because when you're in a cloud environment, you have a way more vendors than you would typically have in a financial organization. So most people don't realize that, I think in 2019, that 68% of all vulnerabilities that occurred last year occurred because of your vendor. It was not because of your own security controls and what you were doing, but it's that due diligence you need to do on your vendor now. So for me, being in that cloud environment, that's a really big risk and a really big issue for me.
Barbara, sorry to interrupt you. When you say vendors, could you tell us who you're referring to there?
Sure. I have, let's just say I use Salesforce as a vendor, Google as a vendor, AWS, because we're in Amazon Web Services cloud environment. From a development house, we use Jira. There's all sorts of, we have GitLabs and GitHub and all these different vendors. We use Zendesk for our help desk. Like, all of these different vendors, they are either holding my code or they're holding, information about our clients, about our payers. I'm very, very strict on what data and what information a vendor can have. Mm-hmm. So when I first started and they said, we're going to use GitHub or GitLabs, I brought it internal. It's in our cloud, our virtual private cloud, but I always ask, can I host it myself? And that's a key requirement for me to limit the number of vendors I have, because in my world, that's all anybody wants to do is go grab another vendor. Hey, and I'm sure everybody gets this, hey, I found this cool new tool. We want to use it. It's going to make our lives easier. And typically no one's looking at it from a risk and security perspective.
Mm-hmm. Diana, what do you see?
Very much similarly along the same lines. Where before, everything was really on premise totally within your control, where you have the ability to lock it all down. We now have this cloud presence. And with each cloud vendor that we bring on board for whatever purpose, there is risk. There's privacy risk. There is, security risk. And all of these things have to be thought of. For me, I would agree, definitely, vendors are a big part of that. And they also kind of stress it out more, because a lot of our vendors don't want to answer questions about their environment and how they do business. Now, from a certain perspective, I can understand that. Some of that information really is very confidential to how they do their own business. But from my perspective, I need to know that you've got a sound environment, because if you don't, and I'm doing business with you, now my risks are, they've just increased, twofold. And you just really want to mitigate that as much as possible. So between the vendors and then just from my general users, just trying to keep them educated. Most of the time, that education is, once a year, but my plan is to make that more frequent, so that we're constantly, hopefully, giving the same messaging around what are all of the things to be avoided. Phishing, really, again, explaining what is phishing, how can you be duped by it, ransomware, all the different pieces of malware that are out there, and there are just so many, and ensuring that, you're tightening or remediating those vulnerabilities so that, you're not left exposed. I think those are my big ones. Yeah. I think for me, the cloud and just user education. I hammer home on the education bit as much as possible, and I try to do that in a way where when I'm training a group, I also give them examples of personal use. So, I mean, when we're talking security of an environment, it's the same, you use the same controls and tools in your personal life that you do in your enterprise or your organization. The only difference is the scope and the size of the tools that you're going to use. But we all have the same concerns, the protection of our data. So I always try to give them examples of how do you compare this versus the enterprise. And when they can see that they're the same, I like to hold that makes the message stick more. So anyways, so cloud and my user base essentially are my big concerns.
So we said user base, and that reminded me of a recent incident, and I'm going to tie my next question to this. So recently I got locked out of my computer, my work computer, and I had to call help desk for several reasons. And the only way that could be solved was changing my password. And of course I have, I think like most of us, don't reuse it because I'm well educated, but have a typical pattern. So I typed out what my new password should be, and the analyst on the other side of the phone said, yeah, Jagati, you typed that out too fast. It's a pattern you use very quickly. It's a pattern you use often, and I want you to change that. So he was spot on. And that took me by surprise because the first time somebody actually caught on to something that I was doing, and it made me aware. And I think my question from there is, we understand the threats, and it comes, you spoke about external, you spoke about internal, education is very key. What do you folks do to solve them? Because clearly the analyst was given training and to look at keyboard pattern and speed to come and say, hey, you changed that very quickly. So how do you solve for these threats? That's my question.
There's a number of different threats out there, and there's a number of different attack vectors you can go down. So, I think the key thing in any organization is know where your data is. One, know what you're trying to protect. Like in my company, I have credit card data, I have healthcare data, I have lots of PII, and I've got all these regs and requirements around how I have to handle and manage that data. But I have to look at where my data is and protect that data and what type of data I'm holding, right? That's a key piece. But also when you're saying, like, how do you prevent people from coming in? Right now I'm going down a zero trust model. I don't know if many of you guys have heard about that, where you authenticate the person and the device to your network. So there is zero trust. Somebody just can't jump on our network. Someone can't just, bring their laptop from home and get on the network by copying over a cert or doing whatever. It's making sure that you have all of these identity and access management controls in place, and that you're constantly focusing and looking for these threats. And that's a lot of what your cybersecurity team does. If you have a good threat intelligence team, they're looking out there for the new and upcoming threats and how we can secure them.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
No, I definitely would agree with her model. And on top of that, also network segmentation, ensuring that we're separating out the different pieces of what our users are doing. So if you're a developer, you should be on a development segment where all of your tools are located, all of your applications, whatever it is you're working with. When we've separated out the segments, it helps reduce the risk of, if there's an intruder within the network, that maybe you can limit them to just a segment that they probably intruded on and lock down the rest of it, thereby containing them. So between that and, again, from an identity and access management standpoint, certifying that your users today still have their current access. Do they still need that access today? Did their role change? And so should there, certain pieces of their access be removed, new pieces added, things of this nature, making sure that kind of it's a role-based access, really. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, because, depending on the size of your environment and how it was originally set up, those things are really hard to do today, but the recertification, at least of the access, kind of gives you a better idea of what your people are accessing, and what abilities can they actually, or what functions can they actually perform on that data. Let me see. Besides the zero trust and the network segmentation, I also think it still comes back to education. If a message is not reinforced constantly, then you tend to get a lot of lax behavior, and then the next thing you know, things are kind of falling by the wayside. So just re-emphasizing that core messaging of whatever it is that you need to emphasize for your environment is something that can't be ignored.
But as I hear both of you speak, I'm recognizing how experienced you both are in what you do, because the way you speak about it is not just, you don't use jargon, but you could be talking to a high school graduate and they'd understand what you're speaking. So I'm really thrilled that both of you are here. As I heard you talk about protection, what I think I heard, right, and you can correct me on this, is control all access and then provide access as needed. I'm oversimplifying what both of you said, but provide access, of course, with training and other things, but provide access as needed. And I'm kind of going broader in this question, but it's really looking forward into the future. Maybe a couple of years ago, when digital became really the hype, and we were looking at the future, there was a notion that each one of us will have a digital identity that is holistic, that is all-encompassing, in that I could take, again, oversimplifying, for instance, my Gmail account and use that one digital identity to covers my life, my work, and anything else I might be interested in. But what I'm hearing you, both of you, speak about in terms of securing information from an organization standpoint, I can't draw the bridge or the leap from saying, hey, in the future, Jagati will have one digital identity and that can go everywhere. She can work with that identity. She can go into social media with that identity. She can do her personal, conduct her personal life online with that identity as well. What do you folks think? What is the future of information security?
So you're definitely going to have a situation like that. I mean, and we kind of have it today. If you think about it, we do federated identity all the time, single sign-on. And it's all managing that. It really comes down to, everybody pretty much does have a single identity today. It's probably, in some cases when you go out to a lot of places you probably go to use your email address as your username, and then you've got your passwords and all of that stuff. But it's really key to managing your passwords, right? Do you have a password history? How often do you rotate the passwords? How are you storing the passwords? How are you managing those passwords? When you're doing federated identity, how are you building that trust relationship with the person you're doing single sign-on with? These things are really key in managing that single source of identity and what continuous protocols you put around it.
And for the rest of us, could you tell us federated identity? Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So think of it as, a lot of you guys represent a school, right? So think of it as you as a school have allowed all of your students to go to your website. And then what I do is I give you my tool, which is an embedded solution that you embed on your website. But what they do, or maybe I give you a link, however it's set up, but the student authenticates to your website. They go and they hit Flywire to make a college payment, and automatically some of their information and data goes into my system, and they're already authenticated to me. So they don't have to put in a username and password a second time. You guys have passed those credentials to me and I have then authenticated the person based off of us having that federated identity with each other. So when you see a lot of times you go and you get passed somewhere else and your data is pre-populated, it's probably because in the back end we did single sign-on or federated identity.
Thank you. Diana, what do you think about the future?
I think that, you know, that single ID is fantastic. The concerns that I have around it is with all of the various types of security breaches that are going on, and we just seem to, you think that we would learn from each one as each one seems to be increasing in size, the amount of data that is exposed. I think about, we strongly emphasize to our users always and forever, don't reuse the same passwords, you know, be careful on these various sites that you go to. Yet and still, at the end of the day, people are people and they get very comfortable. So yeah, I've got this great password and it's just very easy for me to remember. So guess what? I'm going to use the password wherever I go. And that way, you know, I don't have to worry about memorizing umpteen passwords. The downside of that, of course, is that once your ID has been you know, exposed through one of those breaches, the keys to your kingdom are now gone. Because one of the very first things they're going to do is, what are those big sites that most people always have an ID to? And you're going to try to go to those sites and utilize those credentials. And guess what? You're using the same password, they automatically have an in. So trying to really emphasize for people that don't have the use of single sign-on to go from system to system, that if you're utilizing the same username and password, you're doing yourself a disservice. And then just trying to educate about the use of password managers. The ability to create strong, complex passwords without having to memorize each and every single one of them goes a long way towards securing your personal data. And even to a certain degree, your data at work. Many places offer a password manager for you at work, depending on if their systems are tied together or if they're separate. Some places, you know, a lot of their systems are not all tied together, so you might need a different, the synchronicity of the username and passwords are not the same across the board. So the password manager would allow you to be able to utilize different passwords for these different applications with the same username. I always try to really emphasize that for my users, because I myself actually do it. I think it's a wonderful tool, and it really helps you to reinforce that rule of changing passwords or making them complex.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So before I go on to questions, just want to kind of bring it all together for us. So speaking with both of you, I think we have barely scratched the surface of everything we can talk on this topic, and there's so much more. When I think about the kind of industry aspect and you know what's happening at the industry with new technologies coming in on a daily basis and such, I recognize that we're out of time and we cannot cover a lot of it. But with that said, when I kind of reflect back on the session, what I heard both of you speak to is this is a complex area of business. I imagine, like you know, HR and marketing, a lot of this is probably not thought through when we think about conducting business. This clearly is, especially in financial services, increasing visibility to this particular area of information security in the broadest sense possible. Not to mention with all the regulatory oversight that is coming in on data privacy, as well as working between organizations and such. I can imagine that there's a lot more attention coming to this. A career in information security is also not something that, and I'm again oversimplifying, you wouldn't walk off the street. Clearly, there's a lot of experience needed, and there's a lot of knowledge that is continually required to be refreshed and updated to keep the system secure, keep information secure. And the future is, well, as I imagine, as if I could get the theme from both of you, as new threats evolve, new solutions to counter those threats will also evolve. But largely speaking, it's individuals being smart. It's folks like you being cleverer than the hacker that is coming knocking at the door. So with that, maybe I'll take, if you folks are comfortable, maybe take one or two questions that came in here. Ken asked this very early on. Speaking of the dark web, how do you monitor and how does that assist you in cybersecurity? Would one of you like to take this one?
Sure. So a lot of your pen testing team are part of these groups that really are on the dark web and doing, monitoring new things, learning new hacks. You can also use a company called Digital Shadows. If you're not familiar with them, they're kind of expensive, but they too have the ability to monitor the dark web on your behalf. What we're really looking for is the black market. For example, we saw that it wasn't us, but a client of ours. We saw that a number of their credit cards were being sold on a black market. And they were testing them to see whether or not the cards were good or bad. And they were doing this test within seconds of each other. So we were able to tell a client of ours, hey, we think we identified this. You may want to go and investigate. We have found passwords being exposed, of our payers, not exposed by us, but nicely enough, some of the tools that we use and the way that we can see this, we can tell a payer exactly how their password got exposed. We've done that a couple of times. Again, not something that happened on my network, not something that we actually caused, but it was something that we were able to identify just by monitoring that dark web. Digital Shadows, like I said, expensive tool, provides that services. My cyber team started with Digital Shadows and then learned from them and were able to build their own off of open source code and just their own skill sets. So, some of these things may be expensive, but if you have a very talented team, they will learn this stuff quickly and then create their own methods in which to do this, and then you don't have that cost associated with it.
Great, thank you. Diana, I might take the next question that I see here. You have a couple, but I want to pick this one because it speaks to where we are as a society right now. Understanding remote work isn't new, but flipping the switch as we did last year must have created some challenge from an information security standpoint. So could you speak a little about those and what has changed in your environment from there? I'm paraphrasing badly, but yep.
Yeah, so essentially one example I can think of just kind of off the top of my head is a control that we have in place where we don't allow people to print from home, right? It's just a way to ensure that data stays within the system. But because everybody was working from home, and there are some groups within finance that require, the actual tactile of having paper as they're doing what finance people do, we now have to make an allowance for that need. And so then, of course, one has to think about the risk of now opening that up and ensuring that the folks who do have that ability now to print from home, it's a bit of the trust system, trust and honor system. We trust that they fill out a form, they kind of attest to the fact that they have a shredder at home to dispose of documents, a locked file cabinet to put them away so they're just not out in the open, a secure area that they're working in that not everyone has access to. So with each control that you have to loosen or suspend, it's a matter of hoping that the insuring, actually, no, you can't insure, but we hope that the person has the appropriate mitigating controls in place to help reduce the risk as much as possible. There's no way to get it down to zero, short of having that person print in the office and have the paperwork there. But because that's not viable, then we trust the users that we grant that permission to. And so with any of our other requirements that had to be modified to accommodate home use, again, we have the tools to monitor, but it's also kind of, we're trusting the employees to do the right things. So a little bit of a trust and verify thing going on there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I've said this a couple of times through the session. We can probably continue talking with you for a very long time because it's such a multifaceted conversation, and both of you know your subject matter so well. I'm thankful for both of you making the time and sharing it, and in some cases dumbing down this rather complex conversation for the rest of us. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Diana. To the rest of us, as we sign off today, two quick notes on upcoming events. On April 6th, you get some notification from us about the co-hosted event that we have at Suffolk University, talking about funding for women entrepreneurs in the fintech space. Gretchen Wilson, who is on the call today, will be a part of that conversation as well. So hope to see many of you there. Our next session is an equally interesting subject and topic. We're talking about blockchain, and we're hoping to take that conversation from understanding what blockchain is to a future session on talking about digital assets and digital currency. So look forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you for today. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.